Welcome to this live panel discussion this morning based on Moira Welch's book, Happily Ever Older, where we will explore the culture change that is taking place in senior care and how it will improve the quality of life for our nation's seniors. My name is Donna. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Isakson Living, and I will be moderating the panel discussion this morning. Joining me today are our panelists, Toronto Star investigative reporter and Happily Ever Older author, Moira Welsh. Welcome, Moira. Pioneer Network President and CEO, Penny Cook. Welcome, Penny. And Isakson Living founder and our host today, Andy Isakson. In her book, Happily Ever Older, Moira profiles her research of the most innovative senior care communities throughout the world as she herself sought care for her aging parents. We are honored to have an entire chapter dedicated to Park Springs and Isakson Living community based on our relationship model base of care, where we are an example, a practical example for the future of what senior care could and should be. The household model of care that we practice at Isakson Living communities replicate a home environment. Rather than a hospital-like setting that is indicative of a traditional nursing home or a traditional setting, our members are grouped in households designated or designed around a large living room and an open kitchen where meals are prepared by personal chefs and meals shared with the members and our staff. Members have their own bedrooms and en-suites, and our households also have outdoor areas. In our relationship-based care model, engagement is the single most important thing we do that contributes to the well-being of our members. Our households are member-led, so although there are some structure to the day, our members dictate when they rise from sleeping, when they take naps, when they eat, what they eat. It's not unusual for a member to decide to sleep in till 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning and order breakfast from our personal chef in our kitchen. We also have member-led activities. They decide when they want to engage in outdoor activities such as gardening or just putting their toes in the sand in our artificial beach. They decide when they want to watch movies, when they want to put together a puzzle, or when they just want to hold hands on the couch and look through picture albums together, or be at home with their families. The staff at Park Springs knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that the top of the organization supports them in making choices to live our mission of loving and serving members. Sometimes that may not even look like work to someone who is unfamiliar with our model of care. We value those employees who understand the important work they do every day when they take the time to stop mid-task and engage with a member, to sit down and listen to a record, to listen to their story, to share a story, to celebrate birthdays and anniversaries. We want our employees, our care partners, to be truly present in the interaction rather than thinking about what's next on my to-do list. For it's at these moments that we are truly at our greatest. In her book, Moira identified several other senior living programs around the world where this type of innovative work is being done to create environments for people at higher levels of care to live a life with purpose and to age with dignity. As a leader in this industry, Isakson Living will be working with Moira and Penny at Pioneer Network to effectuate change in long-term care for seniors and promote this relationship-based model. as a solution to improve the lived experience in long-term care. It is our goal that the quality of care that is depicted so beautifully in Moira's book becomes the standard rather than the exception. Just a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to Moira. We have placed all of our webinar attendees on mute, and we've also minimized, to minimize the possibility of background noise or other distractions, we've also turned off your cameras. However, we really want your feedback and your questions. Feel free to use the Q&A button on the webinar or even the chat function to ask questions or to offer comments at any time. For those of you who are viewing the webinar at one of our live viewing parties at either Park Springs or Peachtree Hills Place, you're welcome to submit your questions to our attendant, who will enter the questions into the computer on your behalf. Also, hopefully by now, you all have had an opportunity to read Moira's book. If not, we will give directions at the end of the webinar on how you can get your own copy. And for those members of Park Springs and Peachtree Hills Place, we have a complimentary copy of that book available for you in our administration offices. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Moira and let her start the conversation of how she came to write this book and why her discoveries are so very important to the future of senior care. Moira?
Thank you, Donna, and thank you to Isakson Living for this opportunity to speak. Happily Ever Older is a book about hope. It describes a future where seniors can live well in their communities or, if needed, in long-term care and assisted living. The reality is these ideas, these seniors' homes already exist. This is not magical thinking, and I hope my book will offer a call to action to reimagine the way we live in our elder years. I wrote Happily Ever Older to push for change, but also to show our shared experiences as we search for care for our parents and ourselves. Unexpectedly, my parents grew fragile during my book research. They needed to move into a home with supports. And I wove their journey, our struggles, laughter, and ultimately our heartache throughout the chapters of my book. It's a universal story. My research began with a focus on the transformation of nursing homes, but I realized along the way that the principles behind innovative, engaging philosophies like the spirit culture of care created by Andy Isakson of Isakson Living can help all of us reach our late life potential, always moving forward with purpose and emotional connection. We live in a society that is dominated by ageism. We saw it exposed during the pandemic when so many elders struggled in the old institutional long-term care homes that didn't place their needs first. The outcome in homes across North America and Europe led to a devastation that will traumatize people for years. In a different way, the pandemic has forced us to examine the way we treat others, especially seniors. Most of us have now experienced a fair bit of isolation, so we can now empathize with people who spend their later years isolated and alone. Research shows that loneliness is a debilitating emotion, but it also causes significant physical harm, akin to heart disease and worse than obesity. But there is good news. Because of a new wave of leadership in long-term care, times are changing. And if enough people demand improvements to the way we live in our later years, this could be a powerful period of reckoning. That's because the first wave of the very large boomer demographic has started turning 75. This demographic that transformed society as it advanced through every stage of life is now turning its attention to the elder years. And boomers will not be satisfied with the old ways that institutionalize people simply because they are frail or have cognitive decline. There are two ideas in my book that crystallize this new approach to living. The first is found in my prologue, which I wrote in the summer of 2020, just before the book's final deadline. I wanted to write about the impact of the pandemic on long-term care and I reached out to Andy Isakson to ask him about the members of Park Springs and Pebblebrook, the homes I visited for my book. Andy's response was startling in a good way. He told me that at the beginning of the pandemic, he had asked staff to shelter in place by living inside the home, blocking infections from the outside world. 60 workers volunteered. I'm quoting Andy from my book here. He said, "We did it because we just felt it was the right thing to do, which is usually your best decision. I think our relationship-based model was the foundation. That's why we got the volunteers." Those words speak to the importance of care that focuses on emotional connections, which at its heart values the individual needs of the members while ensuring deep relationships between those elders and staff. Creating jobs that give workers a sense of importance and the autonomy to make decisions about the emotional well-being of the people in their care is the foundation of a good life for the members and staff. As every leader I met has said, if the workers are happy, the elders will be too. The next detail is a point made by Penny Cook, the president and CEO of the international culture change organization, Pioneer Network. From her position, leading the organization that brings together operators, regulators, researchers, and consumers, Penny spoke about the current innovation inspired by people with dementia who want to live well. "We are seeing so many different options right now," she said in my book. "It's really pushing us to look at different ways of doing things, and it's having a positive impact on the culture change movement." What I saw during my travels across North America and into the Netherlands were leaders who were constantly evolving, always advancing with new ideas that puts the well-being of elders first, and this time with a focus on people with memory loss. These progressive approaches can make nursing home life a great experience, a time of friendship, creativity, and fun. The homes that I visited for my book enable residents to flourish no matter their age or ability. The locations or caring models may be different, but there is a shared DNA in the good homes because leaders make it to their mission to focus on the individual interests of each resident. In addition to the beautiful collection of art hanging on the walls, a focus on individuals is what I saw when I visited Isakson Living's Park Springs and Pebblebrook in December of 2018. These were not traditional seniors' homes. In the dementia household at Pebblebrook, there were no uniforms, no medical carts cluttering the hallways, and no beige corridors. Every room offers a burst of color. In these spirit care homes, nighttime staff wear pajamas to help members ease into bedtime. In Pebblebrook's dementia household, the residents had deep connections to the people who work in the homes. They were friends. And instead of watching workers rush from task to task, ignoring the people who lived there, staff and residents laughed and joked. They even teased the chef, trying to elicit details about his new girlfriend while asking for the recipe of his chocolate cookies, which, by the way, were spectacular. I've been giving a lot of book talks, and I always share the details of these conversations in Pebblebrook, the liveliness of the back and forth dialogue, especially with Miss Patricia, who spent her year as an English teacher at Agnes Scott College. These conversations show the impact of relationship-based care. That is the goal highlighted by programs in the book. The emotional sustenance, the vitality, and the zest of homes that are leading change. People love the story of Betty, a woman who moved into the dementia household at Pebblebrook and kept to herself at the start, staying solitary until Executive Director Tim Knight and his staff brought him some old LPs, record albums, picked up at a thrift store. When the sound of young Elvis singing Jailhouse Rock reached Betty's ears, the door to her room swung open. She sashayed into the living room, twisting up and down, singing to the music of her youth. The workers watched her and cried. Through music, they found a way to engage with Betty. It was an awakening, Tim said. Music has a profound impact on the brain, tapping into our old memories and emotions. Life at Pebblebrook felt natural, the way we live now, and that familiarity is important. I've been in a great many nursing homes where seniors spend their days staring at the floor. People are bored, lonely, and frustrated. No wonder residents respond with anxiety and aggression. Who wouldn't feel despondent? As an investigative reporter with the Toronto Star, Canada's largest daily newspaper, I've spent years writing about nursing home neglect and abuse, actually starting in 2003 when I spent a year on an investigation. It revealed the worst. After the investigation was published, the health minister of the day promised a revolution into long-term care. And that led to new nursing home laws, but the institutional style prevailed. I stayed on the story for years, writing on variations of the same investigation, neglect and abuse. One woman broke her thigh bone, and the home refused to send her to the hospital, giving her a Tylenol instead, as if she didn't feel pain because of her age. In another home, a woman choked to death on a restraint that held her in a chair. The stories grew darker. There were assaults, police investigations, people went to jail. In 2016, after breaking a news story about a nurse who was about to be charged with killing 8 long-term care residents in Ontario, my editor asked me to do another investigation, just like those I'd already published. In journalism, we welcome creative debates between editors and reporters, so we discussed the folly of doing the same story repeatedly while expecting a different result. That led to a very unexpected investigation into the positive. I spent a year following a nursing home just outside Toronto that was beginning a pilot project with the Butterfly Program, based in the United Kingdom. During that story, I interviewed Harvard-trained Dr. Bill Thomas, who shocked me, an investigative reporter trained to uncover the worst, with the following comment: "The positive story is the most dangerous story you can tell." What he meant was telling stories about innovative homes that show elders can live with friendship and purpose, challenge the operators and governments that preferred the ease of the status quo. As it turns out, he was right. In Ontario, where I live, some operators are slowly starting to recognize the value of relationship-based care. An independent commission examined the causes of our province's many COVID-related nursing home deaths. I was asked to speak to the commission about my book findings last fall. When the report was released a few weeks ago, the panel of commissioners, a judge, a doctor who was a hospital CEO, and a bureaucrat, said that relationship-based care is the foundation of all 85 recommendations for change. We shall see if any of it leads to real transformation, but the seed has been planted. The idea that we can do better is no longer considered quite so radical. In Saskatoon, in the Canadian prairies, the Sherbrooke Community Centre practices a philosophy called the Eden Alternative, created by Dr. Bill Thomas in the early 1990s. It focuses on principles that eradicate boredom, helplessness, and loneliness. It also focuses on personal development at any age. One of the women I met at Sherbrooke needed to strengthen her leg after a stroke, and physiotherapists wanted her to exercise in the home swimming pool. Alice Cowell was her name. She spent most of her adult life on a 700-acre farm in the middle of the prairies and wasn't much for water sports. But at the age of 91, she bought her first bathing suit and began swimming lessons. "I was petrified," she told me, "but I just love it now." The home has an art studio where people, including those with cognitive decline, have discovered a talent for painting. One woman with dementia picked up a paintbrush and discovered she was actually a very good artist, and her work has since been displayed at conferences in the United States. As her dementia progressed, her art changed, the images growing smaller, but she continued painting. In Pebblebrook and the terraces at Peachtree Hills Place, members have dance parties or paint, creating beautiful still life art. At De Hogevik, the nursing home village in the Netherlands, people are free to step outside, sit in the courtyard, walk, or stop in the store and pick up a bottle of wine. These are opportunities to engage through creativity, hold purpose, build confidence, and lead to a bit of fun. And why should that stop in our later years? In San Diego, I visited an enriched day program for people with memory loss called Town Square. It was styled after small town America in the 1950s or 60s, part of reminiscence therapy that inspires memories from the past. It also gave people a sense of purpose. There's a story in my book about a woman named Susie who spent her career as an office manager and accountant, and after living with Alzheimer's disease for a few years, couldn't understand why she could no longer go to work. Susie had a type A personality. She liked to be in control. Her son Joey, a deputy sheriff in San Diego County, described his mom as a princess and a firecracker. She told the managers of the new Town Square day program that his mom wanted to be busy again, to work. It was all in her file. When the day program opened its doors, everyone was excited. For the staff, it felt like the first day at college or a new job. For Susie, it was terrifying. She held tight to Joey's arm. She told him to take her home. All the others settled into the 1950s diner or theater, but not Susie. David Wallace ran the Senior Helpers Staffing Agency that supplied frontline workers to the program. They were trained to understand the needs of people with dementia, and so was David. Eventually, he told Susie's son to leave. Just go to work, it's okay. Everything will be fine, he told Joey. Susie was not pleased. What kind of son would just leave me here, she said. By 1 p.m., Joey's cell logged 100 missed calls from his mom. No matter how hard David Wallace tried, Susie was not having it. He was about to call Joey to share his mom's distress when, as David later recalled, the thought popped into my mind. Susie had been an accountant. He had read her chart. David ran upstairs to the administration offices. On the computer, he typed invoices. One was the gas bill, another was the electric bill. A bill for pencils was $3. Computer costs were $100. Some included dates and money owed. Working fast to get the papers printed, he cut them in half and raced down the stairs, bursting into Town Square. Susie was sitting in Glenner Park. We're being audited, he announced. Does anyone know an accountant? I'm an accountant, Susie said. David asked for her help. She picked a room to work in and, head down, began to focus. When Susie later stepped outside the room, David raced down the stairs to meet her. Everything is good and checks out, she told him. If you want me to keep doing this, just make sure that everything is dated properly. Some of these invoices aren't dated, and I don't work like that. He asked if she would like to help again. She chose an office in the Town Square City Hall at a wooden desk with a filing cabinet and a radio. She put her sweater over the back of the chair. The next morning, Joey awakened at 5:30 to see his mom peering over him. She was dressed, hair done. Joey, she said, I can't be late for work. For the next year, Susie didn't miss a day at Town Square. After that first day, in that moment of duress to find something, anything to connect with her, staff at the program gave her real work to do, like organizing marketing brochures. She made friends with others and mostly spent her time chatting, doing chair yoga, or singing to music in the theater. But she always hung her sweater over the back of that office chair. The point was, Susie found purpose. It gave her another year of vitality until her Alzheimer's progressed. When she moved into a nursing home, her son was able to tell the staff that his mother loves to work and she needs goals to keep her happy. Glenner was a day program, but like Isakson Living, they understood the need for all of us to live with meaning. And all of the homes I visited had their own philosophy, although purpose was at the center of it all, whether or not people had memory loss. In my book, I spend a lot of time talking about the experience of families. Until we go through it ourselves, it's almost impossible to appreciate the emotions that people feel, taking a father or a husband to long-term care. In my personal experience, even after writing about seniors' care for years, it was terrifying trying to care for my father while my mother was in the hospital. He was still agile and fast at 88. One minute, he'd be standing beside me on the sidewalk, and the next, he was stepping into traffic with no regard for the cars flying towards him. I suddenly understood, really understood, what families were experiencing all these years when they called me in the newsroom, crying, unable to find the right care. Many feel an overwhelming sense of guilt for being unable to properly care for their loved one at home, even if they've grown exhausted, and even if they've done it for years. Guilt is a debilitating emotion. As Andy Isakson said of finding good care, if you don't feel good, it can come back to haunt you. And as I wrote in my book, guilt is an emotion that can torment people, especially when care goes wrong, even when it goes right. Some children feel shame over the ability of a caregiver, a stranger, to look after dad when they couldn't. Or a wife feels resentment because a worker can bring out the humor in her husband when he hasn't laughed with her for years. The act of letting go, it's never easy. One woman I wrote about asked the manager at Pebblebrook if she could live with her husband in the home. The administrator thought about it and said, yes. For the next 8 months, Marjorie Bittinger lived with her husband in a nursing home until she was ready to leave. It was a very unique situation, but it shows one home's embrace of family and a wife's struggle to adapt as her husband shifts to the vulnerable phase of life. When I was in the Netherlands, I visited 2 homes. The leaders I spoke with kept using the word normal. And eventually at Hogevik, the village, I asked, what's up with being normal? A normal life is what we want to provide, I was told. At Hogevik, the manager said a normal life with small households, freedom to step outdoors or walk in the gardens gives people comfort because it is similar to the way they always lived. The homes I visited across North America didn't repeat the word normal, but that is essentially what they were offering. So we are in a time of reckoning. The choices we have, the decisions we make on late life living matter deeply to our parents and ourselves. I hope that the stories in my book will expose the fact that good caring, good late life experiences are already established in progressive homes like Pebblebrook, Park Springs, and the terraces at Peachtree Hills Place. It's time to embrace the ideas that enable us to flourish at any age and demand transformative change. Let's ask ourselves, if not now, then when? Thank you.
Thank you, Moira. There are so many great ideas and concepts in your book, and it is truly inspirational. Thank you for sharing that with us today, and we look forward to giving you some questions from our audience, so stand by. If anyone in our audience or on the webinar has questions or wants to offer comments, feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen or the chat button. So let's move into our panel discussion. And Andy, I want to start with you. When you think about change in our industry and you think about the changes that you've made in your communities, Park Springs and now Peachtree Hills Place, what was your inspiration for entering the senior living industry? And what was your inspiration for doing it differently versus the traditional model that we all have known for the last 100 years?
Well, I got exposed to the industry really from a similar standpoint. When my dad was in his retirement years, when he was looking for options, I went around and looked at communities with him and saw it through his eyes. And through the decision process, he made a decision to move to a community where my mother was living with dementia in the early stages, and they chose a community, moved there, were very happy. Unfortunately, unexpectedly, my father developed, discovered lung cancer, and passed away relatively soon after moving, the first 90, 120 days. So my sister and my brother and I, were faced with the task of caring for my mother, and we started off by taking turns spending the night over there after my father's death, and realized that wasn't gonna, we couldn't do that forever, but it really led us to take care of my mother the last 5 years of her life, and unfortunately, our last 5 years, she had to move 4 or 5 times as we would get a call, and community would say, well, we can no longer take care of your mother. You're going to need to move her somewhere else. And so when all that was over, I got exposed to continuing care retirement communities where you have all levels of care and you never have to move. And they were very common in Atlanta. I said, I don't know how this business works or how to make money doing it, but I know there's a market for it. And I'm going to, pursue it. And I did, which eventually led me to developing Park Springs, which has been open for like 17 years now this summer. It's been very rewarding. And so then I learned the business from the operator's standpoint. We had outside management to help us, and but my mother-in-law lived in long-term care, assisted living, and then skilled nursing. I was over there seeing her a lot, so I got to know the staff that worked there very well. And one thing that struck me is that the people in this work in this business, I said you have to have heart to make it. And there are other jobs you could do that would pay the same money that are easier, but people that do it, they have a calling to care for other people, and it's very rewarding, and that's why they're in the business. And it's not on their job description, but I know sometimes the nurse or care partner will sit down with a member and hold their hand when that's what needs to happen. That's not on their job description, just some people know. So, but from a consumer standpoint, my memory as a consumer, I felt like things weren't as good as they could be. And then I also felt like they probably didn't work as well for the staff I had as it could be. So I really felt like it's my job to find a better model. And I said, if I can give my people the tools to do a better job, I'm giving them what they want, because that's where their heart is. So I began by interviewing a lot of members that lived in long-term care, and then I interviewed families, interviewed the staff members, and I started doing a lot of research in the industry. And I remember one year I was in California at a convention and heard a presentation by a group out of Michigan that had a large campus with all different levels of healthcare on the campus, and they had built a household model community on their campus, and they said that there was a waiting list of people wanting to live there. That impressed me. And then they said, and there's also a waiting list of people that wanted to work there, and that really impressed me, because it's really got to work for everybody. Your care depends on those care partners and nurses, and having people that want to work there. I mean, that really got my attention. So I researched the household model and the business, and eventually led us when we expanded our healthcare at Park Springs with Pebblebrook. We built a household model of care there, a relationship-based model, and it's been very successful for us. So you can kind of say, "Oh, well, that sounds good," but I like to sometimes tell a story. We in memory care there, we had two households. There were about 35 people that worked in there. So the first year with the household model, we went through a lot of training, and during that year and at the end of the year, this is the industry where the turnover, I think, averages a little over 50%. So at the end of the year, we looked at those 35 people that started the project. We had lost nobody. We still have the same 35 people working in memory care, which is, most people would tell you in the industry that's just not possible. But so we were onto something that when it works for the staff, it makes life better for the members, and make that life better for the families. It's really just everybody living and working together. So that was my inspiration, was to give my people the tools to do a good job, and they came through for me.
Thank you, Andy. Penny, we feel like we are doing something pretty special at Park Springs and Peachtree Hills Place, as you heard from Andy. But we are by no means alone in seeking alternatives to traditional care. Can you share with us your perspective on how culture change and the movement of culture change has affected senior care and how it's provided?
Of course. Well, thanks so much, Donna. And before I answer that, let me say that what you're doing at Isakson Living is pretty special. So don't sell yourself short on that one. And my apologies to everyone if you hear a dog barking in the background for a moment. The world of technology. Well, I really think that our traditional historical model of residential senior care and caring has been pretty institutional throughout the years. I mean, you think about the fact that most nursing homes, for instance, that we see today were modeled after hospitals. They have the long corridors, the very sterile environments, sometimes 2 or more people living in the same room. And then we saw the advent of assisted living communities as a possible alternative to that institutional environment. And now we see more life plan communities as well. Well, along with the development of these different choices in residential settings, we now have changes happening not only in the design of care communities, like the household model that Andy talked about, but also in the philosophy and the way we support, care, and serve people as they grow older. And this is all what we talk about in the culture change movement. And it truly is to change this culture of senior living and care. So instead of focusing on efficiency and tasks and in a more clinical and medical model, we want people to focus on developing relationships with residents and members, truly getting to know people and their preferences, their choices, their needs, getting to know who they are as individuals, and then designing the caring and support around that. It's really this shift in thinking and perspective. And one of the things we want people to have as they move into a residential living community is engagement with life and meaning and purpose. And at Pioneer Network, we provide resources and education to help people transform their institutional practices to ones that are truly centered on the person themselves and directed by them as well. We want to make sure that communities are places where people want to live. And as Andy said, almost more importantly, sometimes places where people want to work, not institutions or facilities. People don't want to live in an institution, and they really don't want to work there usually either.
Thank you, Penny. We've all talked this morning about community. We've all said the word community, and it's so important throughout our lives. And that doesn't stop when we become seniors. Can each of you explain the concept of community? And when I say community, I mean residents and families and staff. Why is that so important to providing care and caring for seniors that enhances life? And as Moira has talked about, aging with dignity. How does that work, this community aspect? And Moira, we'll start with you and then go to Andy and then Penny.
The most important piece of community is that, first of all, it allows us to be engaged, but second of all, it allows us to live as we have always lived. So we live in communities. We don't live in what people call the house on the hill, the nursing home that is so isolated from the rest of the world. And so the goal is to maintain those connections so there's a natural flow of life. It's not a scheduled event where someone perhaps brings their grandchildren in, but there are different ways of maintaining those connections to the outside world and just making it a normal way of living. And especially what I've learned is for people with cognitive decline, when they're afraid of the changing surroundings and they're unsure about sort of where they are in life, that sense of familiarity and those close connections to their families and those deep friendships with workers in the homes, that keeps their lives calm, peaceful. It gives meaning and it gives understanding because that's how they had always lived.
How about you, Andy?
You know, we did a mural in Bevelbrook about, you know, life and long-term care, and which I've always been happy about. And it really tells a story, and it's really three groups. It's the members that live there, it's the staff who work there, and it's the families. And it's those three groups and the relationships that go on. And it's really a beautiful story of the relationships, a lot of strong relationships. And it's got to work for everybody. And when it does work, Donna, as you mentioned, you know, it's like nobody's working, and I say that in a positive way. They're just being together as family, know each other, have relationships, and it's not work. It's like family, and I think that's really, you know, the key to great care. And you know, as I mentioned, our it's a calling of staff to take care of people. You know, in our mural is one picture of Pam, whose mother lived in she lived independently in Park Springs, later lived in assisted living and skilled nursing, and asked Pam to come back about 6 months after her mother had passed. And you know, the mural is done for the photograph, and you see the expressions on Pam's face, and there's joy at the same time she's crying, and you can look in her face and you can probably see every emotion. And she was in an embrace with Dorothy, who's a nurse in skilled care, and you can see the connection between the two that you can't. It's not something you can fake. It's the picture tells the story. And so I asked Pam about later about that, her relationship with Dorothy, and she said, you know, I'm an only child, and when I was going through this with my mother, you know, Dorothy and the care partners, Marlene, they were my family. And these are strong relationships that you'll remember the rest of your life. So that's really what it's all about, and it does take a community.
Thank you, Andy. Penny, what are your thoughts on community, and why is it so important?
Well, I would say that as human beings, we really want to, and we've adapted to live in community. That's sort of our natural environment. And I think that means something different to each of us. But I think at its basic level, it means that we have the opportunity to engage with the people that we want to, and in an environment that provides comfort and security to us as well, and that we have that vibrancy in our life. We have that reason why we want to get up every morning. And I think that really helps to create those meaningful interactions with not only our family members and our friends and our neighbors, but the people who work where we live, those people who are involved in our lives, even if we only see them briefly at certain times of day, like the mail carrier, or maybe the maintenance staff. And we have the opportunity to interact with other people who might be a little bit different than us, you know, possibly different ages or abilities that we have, different hobbies. And when I think about this, I think about this concept of our planet as well. And it's this concept of biodiversity, that biodiversity is all the different kinds of life that you find in one area that lead to a very robust environment. And it tends to happen naturally and organically if you kind of provide the right space for it. And that's really how I think about community as well. And, you know, I agree with what Moira and Andy said. I mean, community is just something that's so natural to our life. And I think historically, as Moira said, you know, the house on the hill, that sometimes we've looked at senior living environments as sort of other. It's a different place. It's not part of the community. And I think that's what we need to change, that senior living environments should not only be communities within themselves, but they should be part of the external community too. And it should be one. And I think that, that's definitely what's been created at Isakson Living. And as Moira points out, at different communities across the United States and across Canada as well.
Thank you, Penny. That's an interesting concept of biodiversity in community. It's the philosophy, I guess, of seeing community as a living, breathing organism that's ever evolving. So thank you for sharing that. Moira, in your book and in what you just shared with us, you talked about the folly of continuing to write about the negative aspects of what was going on in traditional nursing homes, nursing care, memory care. And you talked about the folly as, continuing to think that something would change. And you had an epiphany when you went to the Ontario home. Can you share a little bit with our audience about your perspective on educating consumers and why it's so important to educate consumers on alternatives, and just your thoughts on, how we should educate ourselves?
For a long time, people accepted what was available. So if the nursing home, if they had to have that kind of care, they would just go into the home and never expect that it could be any better than what it was. And so journalists like me, and I'm not the only one, wrote for years about neglect and abuse and detailed investigations. And again, it didn't change. And so as Dr. Thomas pointed out, you need to tell a different story, one that actually shows that there's proof that life can be different, and that it disallows, so to speak, the operators to say we're doing the best we can't do any better. And so for me, that was a shift in thinking. And what I saw by going through the experience of the home just outside of Toronto was a real change in the way that people viewed their lives. And I'm not just talking about the people who live there, but the people who work there. They would speak to me about the changes in the residents they cared for as they came back to life, in a sense. So people who had been left alone for so long, just sitting in a chair, staring at a floor, would withdraw into themselves. So we would walk by them, and if you didn't know better, you would think that that person didn't have the capability of communicating. But in fact, they did. It's just nobody had ever paid attention to them. And that's where these ideas are now catching on. And once you start to talk about this, the life that reemerges, it's hard for people to turn away from that reality.
Thank you, Moira. Wow, you all have such incredible insights into the future and the present tense of senior care and alternatives in senior care. And I think we all agree that this is something that everybody needs to be involved in, whether you're searching for your grandparents or your parents or even for yourself, because we will all be consumers one day. We can do better. And when you know to do better, you do better once you have that knowledge. And Moira's book proves that it's possible. Andy's experiences with his communities prove it's possible. Penny, your international reach with the Pioneer Network proves it's possible. So I want to move now to questions from the audience. I'm going to check the Q&A here and see what kind of questions we have. Andy, the first question is for actually you and I. How do you find staff who understand this type of care? Do you have special training for them? So Andy, what do you think?
Well, one thing we look for is people with heart, as I discussed. You really got to have that to make it in this business. But what we do is completely different than other people. And, a lot of times we get people that have worked other places, and, that can be an obstacle. I think 20% of the people, it comes natural to them. The first day they got it. 60% of the people, you have to really work with them and train them. And it takes a while. It doesn't happen day one. It's you got to show them and work with them. And then, 20% of the people are just used to the way they've been doing things, and you kind of never get there with them. So it takes a little while to get the right team, but when you do, it works and looks effortless. But it's a beautiful thing to see, and it's completely different from what you've seen in the past or may remember. So, but they're good people. There are good people out there. I think it's in everyone if you can bring it out and give them the opportunity to do a good job and have purpose with their life.
And I'll add to that, Andy. We do have behavioral questions and emotional intelligence questions that we use to recruit our staff that works in the household. And Tim Knight, who is our Executive Director of Organizational Development and Training, helped develop those questions. And we do use those questions to interview potential candidates for our households. And it has made a difference in the types of people that we hire and bring on. And I think Andy's right. I think the type of people that are attracted to this industry have to have heart. But we take it a step further and do behavioral interviewing to really find the folks that are going to fit in our households. This question is I'm going to pose this to Penny. Penny, because of ageism, homes such as Isakson Living and their communities are the leaders and maybe the exception. The simple concept is based not on policy, but on common sense. So the question is, how do we make ageism an issue so that homes like Isakson Living communities flourish? What are your thoughts on ageism and culture change?
Well, I have to say I love this question because I think that ageism is rampant in our society. And I think it's this negative perception we have of growing older. And I think probably primarily for a lot of people, it's based on that fear of growing older. Maybe a fear of the loss of control, a fear of the loss of ability, the fear of the loss of cognition and things like that. And I think we see that you can walk down any greeting card aisle in the store and you can find so many cards that make fun of aging. And one might say, well, that's just, being humorous. But I think we tend to try to mock or push those things away that we're fearful of. And we see anti-aging creams and all these things. But when it comes down to it, if we're not aging, what are we? Well, we're dying. And so I think we need to embrace aging. And so many studies have shown that people are happier as they grow older. And I do think we need to embrace that. So as far as how that plays out in senior living, I think that's why we have people who have traditionally not wanted to move into a residential or congregate living environment when they need care and support. I think that that's also impact our workforce. In the scheme of nursing, those nurses who work in nursing homes are really looked at as having some of the lower end jobs of nursing. Hospitals are at the top and nursing homes are at the bottom. And I think that's all because of this fear we have of aging. And so I think that just like all of us need to advocate for the types of places we want to live in as we grow older, either for ourselves or for our loved ones. I think we all need to be mindful of our own ageist attitudes first and foremost. And then I think we need to have open conversations about this. I will just add a plug. I'm part of a project from Virginia Commonwealth University, and we're developing an ageism toolkit for senior living, so that senior living communities can begin having these conversations with their residents and members, with their family members, and with their staff. Because we often find that the most ageist places sometimes are senior living communities themselves. And so we hope to be helpful in providing the opportunity to have conversation about this. And I think once we begin to have these conversations, places like Isakson Living can flourish.
Thank you, Penny. We look forward to seeing that toolkit. Thank you. Next question is for Moira. Moira, what would be the greatest takeaway to give to a family who is beginning the journey of seeking appropriate care for their loved one?
Look for homes where you can feel that there are connections between residents and staff. And by feeling, I mean, don't go into a home and expect that you go on an official tour, but really try to absorb what you see unfolding around you. And I'll give you an example. When I visited Pebblebrook, the repartee at that table where I sat during lunchtime, that was not contrived. It was not possible to have those kinds of familiar relationships between the members and the staff. Those were friendships there. And so I would ask a lot of questions. I would ask to spend time there. I would even ask, if you narrow down a home, to come with my loved one for lunch and see what's possible, but to really get a feeling for it and ask a lot of questions based on what you've heard today about what the home offers and what's central to their care. Is it getting tasks done on time, or do relationships trump tasks, as a lot of people like to say? If I'm busy doing something as an employee and you need me as a member, I will put down my work and come to you. Those are the kinds of homes that you want for your loved one. Everything else will fall into place.
A great answer. Thank you, Moira. That's going to be really, really helpful for those that are in our audience.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, absolutely.
I really think the way to have change in the industry is an educated consumer, and that's why I'm so excited about Moira's book. People being more knowledgeable about it and seeking change and demanding change, and I think the generations coming along now, people are starting to ask more questions, and I think it's good, and I think that's how we make change. So I applaud you for doing the book. I think it's terrific.
Anything to add, Penny?
No, I would echo that same thing. I think that more and more, if we can educate ourselves about what we want for ourselves and our loved ones and our friends, we need to do that. And we need to do that advocacy, and advocacy is based on education. So reading Moira's book is a first step. You know, I have to say I bought it for my family and friends as well, because I think it's just so relatable and gives such good examples of the type of care and support that we're looking for.
And this next question I want to pose to all of you. Andy is a developer, owner, operator, Moira as an investigative reporter and a champion for change, and of course, Penny, from your international perspective as an industry group. A lot of operators think that having a life plan community or a community of care where you never leave, and Andy touched on this for his parents and why he started Park Springs, but a lot of operators believe that the continuum of care, that you can't love and serve members while taking care of your business. But that doesn't have to be exclusive, that you can do both. Who'd like to go first on answering that question? How do you do both successfully? Moira, what are your thoughts?
Some of the most progressive homes in my province in Ontario are for-profit homes. And I've seen it in both. I've seen the initial home that transformed itself that I wrote about was a municipally operated home. But there are other homes that came on, and the leaders of those homes have been pushing change probably harder than anyone, and have in fact impacted what incremental change we're having in our province. So I do think that they are speaking about these issues and showing people that it's possible no matter what type of home they're living in, and showing that it can be done. And Andy can speak in greater depth about the business side of it, but they've made cases where staff turnover is lessened, the sick days have gone down. These so-called, what the industry has traditionally called behaviors of people living with cognitive decline, their internal data shows that those have diminished because people are actually living lives of fulfillment instead of boredom and frustration. And so those so-called behaviors are, for the most part, probably indicative of an empty life. And so we're seeing all of these examples out there.
Thank you, Moira. Andy, what are your thoughts?
Well, I believe that good care is good business. I think the consumers will recognize that and come to your community. And whether you're a for-profit or not for profit, I mean, both models, you have to make a profit to be in business. So not for profits have bonds to pay, et cetera. So, but that's why I'm all for an educated consumer. I think because they're putting more pressure on operators to do a good job is what's going to move the industry forward. Better service, and we need some new models. We need some better care. And we need some innovation, and we don't necessarily just need to keep on doing what we've done for years and years. So we've got to have people that are willing to, take a little risk, do something different, try to improve, and hopefully an educated consumer will recognize that and support it. So I think it's good business.
Penny, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to tell you a quick story because I think Moira and Andy have said a lot. So I live in Denver, Colorado, and there's a nursing home here that was in jeopardy of closing a number of years ago. They only had about, I think, 30% of the people that they could living there. They couldn't get people to work there. It just wasn't a good environment. And so a new administrator came in, a new company took it over, and the administrator sort of was allowed to have this free reign. And she started just kind of chipping away at these institutional practices of this nursing home. She supported people the residents there to wake up when they wanted to eat what they wanted to. She only bought the type of food that they wanted to eat. So she saved on food costs, all of these different things. Like at Isakson, she hired people that she really believed had the heart and the personality for the work. She felt she could do the training. She always asked them what else they could do. So maybe they were a massage therapist and also a CNA. So maybe they could give massages to the rest of the residents and the staff. The maintenance men, she always asked them what else that they wanted to do. She ended up creating a home. And for those of you familiar with Medicaid, that about 95% of the residents who lived there were on Medicaid. She filled that home with people who wanted to live there. And like the Michigan example, people who wanted to work there. There was a waiting list. And I think what exemplified this change is that her office went from a regular size office, probably similar, Donna, to what you're in, to a closet, because she wanted to make sure that, number one, she was never in her office. And number two, that space was for the residents and her staff. And this home was financially viable. It was actually making money, even though 95% of the residents who lived there use Medicaid as their payer source. This is just the example of the changes we can create if we listen to the residents and the people closest to them, which are often the direct care staff members.
That's a great story, Penny. Build it and they will come. Andy said something similar, as well as Moira. Another question for the group is, we are primarily speaking about memory care households. And this question comes from someone who says, my husband was in skilled nursing, and in that setting, the members or the residents are less able to engage What do you see as the different challenges between skilled nursing and memory care relative to engagement and aging gracefully? Moira, what are your thoughts?
I've seen good examples in the original home that I wrote about for the year, where someone who was in a very advanced stage of medical need, there was a household for those people and a small household. And so the engagement was different. It was slower. It was more involved hand massages at the beginning and music. And I recall a gentleman who sat in a chair and didn't move for the first 6 months that I was there. And one day I came in and they had headphones on. He had liked disco music back in the day. And they were playing Dancing Queen from ABBA. And I came in and this man was sitting there. He had a maraca in his hand. He was dancing in his chair in his own way and singing in his own way to music. And so this just showed that over a period of time, this very slow but very closely connected relationship between residents and their caregivers resulted in caregivers understanding the joys of the residents and connecting with them in a much different way. So, but it was slow paced and quite beautiful as well to behold.
That's a great story. Andy, do you want to add something?
I do. You know, at Park Springs and Peachtree Hills Place, both, you know, we operate 7 different kinds of households, and you know, any person could be might be in all 7 of those at one point in your life, like you don't know, but you know, conditions are different. So skilled nursing is different than memory care. People in the early part of living with dementia is different than people in the later part of dementia. So by having these separate households, we're able to train our staff for people for where they are, and they're living with people of like mind. So it lets us do a better job with care, and people trained for that point. So there are a lot of different things that can happen in your life, long-term care, but we try to be ready for all of them, but they all are a little bit different, from high engagement to more just comfort. So that's one of the advantages of the household model, is it allows you to really tailor your care more for people where they are.
Thanks, Andy. Penny, what are your thoughts?
I would agree, you know, with what Andy was just saying about the household model. I think those smaller environments, so that staff members can really get to know residents and members well, is just so extremely important. And I think that's true whether we're talking about memory care or whether we're talking about a skilled environment as well. And maybe it takes a little bit longer, but I think sometimes we're so used to finding out who someone was in their sort of prior life before they came into the community. And of course, that's really important to know somebody's roots and foundation. But I think that as someone moves into a skilled environment, that really finding out who they are now is so important. What makes them tick now? You know, I just know with myself, and I'm sure we all can relate to this, what we liked 20 years ago may be a little bit different than what we like now, whether we're talking about, you know, the programs we watch, the music we listen to, the food we eat. So really taking time to get to know someone and understand, as I think Moira and Andy both said, sort of where they're at is just so important. And I really think that is the foundational piece. I mean, we talk so much at Pioneer Network that it's about relationships. Relationships are the most important building block of community. And I so believe that to be true. So it may take a little bit more time on the front end to really get to know somebody, but oh my goodness, I mean, the benefits are more than worth it, both for the person themselves and for you as a staff member too.
Thank you all for participating in our discussion today. You are all experts in your field, and you have given us answers today that are good for our audience. I tell you, I've learned something new from all three of you, so thank you for that. A special thanks to Moira for the platform for this discussion, which is your book, Happily Ever Older. Penny, we appreciate all the work that you do with Pioneer Network and leading the industry forward. And then, of course, Andy, who I work for, and I enjoy and am inspired by every day. We just thank you all three for being a part of this panel. If our audience, if you do not have a copy of Happily Ever Older, please make sure to get a copy. You can get it on the Pioneer Network website. If you're a member of our community, we have complimentary copies for you if you live at Peachtree Hills Place or Park Springs. It's also available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And I want to end with a quote that I think sums up what we've talked about today and represents the discussion of community and change and alternative ways of taking care of seniors and caring for seniors. And the quote says, "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." So thank you all. We appreciate you. Thank you to our audience. We hope you feel that you've learned something new, and we'll be talking to you soon. Take care.